Hello, everyone. We are continuing on with our analysis of Set or Seth, and we are integrating Mary into the discourse because it is necessary to do so to understand the role of Seth or Set in Scripture and the role of Mary, who comes later, according to the narrative, in Scripture. And so, what's going on symbolically, psychologically, is a contest between Set or Seth and Mary. It's important to keep in mind who Mary represents, what her name represents. Mary is also known as Regina Caeli, also Rex. And so Mary's name represents ruler. When you say Mary, you are saying ruler, queen, but you are also saying rebel. The question is, what is Mary in rebellion about? Who is the rival? And the rival is ultimately this entity understood as Seth or Set that emerged from Eve or Kava and Adam. In fact, Mary gives birth to the second Adam. And in this narrative, this second Adam actually represents the first Adam. And we will get to that. First, we're going to look at Set or Seth again and what Set represents. Remember, Set is this Egyptian deity, and Set is also the child of Adam and Eve, or Adam and Kava, or Hava. And Set is that third son after Cain is sent off and Abel has been destroyed by Cain. But again, remember that there's some odd similarity between Cain and Seth, almost as if they are the same entity. Now, with respect to Set or Seth, what we have is this entity that appears in many instances as chimeric, so it's sort of a blend of these entities. But it also is an entity that is a master of disguise. And we're going to talk about what that's all about. And you're going to see a relationship between Set and Seth and someone who comes later on down the line in the Genesis narrative. Set is also understood as a shape shifting deity. So this thing can take on many forms. And so it is a deceiving deity. And this letter here in the Hebrew alphabet that is referred to as Sin and Shin really looks like sin and shin, quite frankly, literally Sin and Shin. This is pretty much the calling card of Seth. And so this is that letter that is representative of Set in a number of ways, and we will talk about that. And yes, this thing is like a crown, a flaming crown. Okay. And so this flaming crown that is representative of Set or Seth is essentially a trident, sort of Poseidon's trident. It also represents a corona, mhm, and flames. And so we're going to quickly go through what Set represents. And this is going to be consistent with what is understood as that man of sin and the son of perdition, because we're going to break down sin and we're going to break down perdition. We're going to break down Set or Seth, and you're going to see how all of this comes together, converges on Set or Seth. Although it's not clear the total significance of this dynamic, Set or Seth is of the pharaohs. And so this entity has a special relationship with the pharaohs, with the rulers, with the kings of the earth. Now we're going to quickly look at this dynamic of the man of sin and the son of perdition. So, what exactly is sin? What exactly is perdition? And what does this have to do with Set or Seth? And here you see with this discussion about the revelation of the man of sin, that the man of sin is actually referred to as the man of lawlessness and the son of what? Destruction. Okay, so what do we mean when we say man of sin? The man of sin means the man of lawlessness, iniquity, heinousness, crime, wickedness, immorality, and evil. And when we look at the designations for this deity known as Set or Seth, you will see why this deity fits with this definition of sin. Now we're going to go on and look at this dynamic of not only being the man of sin, but Seth being the son of the offspring of perdition or destruction. And so when we are translating and looking at this whole idea of perdition, what we have is the son of hell. So that's what the son of perdition is all about. This is the son of the abyss, the son of the inferno, the netherworld, the son of punishment, the son of wrath. This is the son of Hades. And so with Set, we have this man of sin and this son of perdition, the son of destruction. And we're going to look a little bit more now at who Seth is in terms of his deity status. What does he represent? One of the first things to make note of with respect to Seth is his name is associated with this idea of the sons of tumult. And so essentially, Seth is associated with the sons of commotion, the sons of uproar, and the sons of disorder. And so, in this way, Seth is associated with this idea of the anti Ma'at. Okay. We aren't going to go in depth into Ma'at right now, but Mary actually represents and has a similarity in terms of name to Ma'at. And so we're going to look at that a little bit, but that's what Seth is representing. So he's sort of the antithesis of Mary, the antithesis of Ma'at, and we're going to look at why this is the case and why Mary is representing this rebellion. First of all, as a reminder, Seth is the god of the desert. Seth is the god of desolation. And here we have this other odd dynamic with respect to Seth or Set. Set is a representative or a deity of foreign lands and foreign people. And so he is the antithesis of a god or a deity for indigenous people. And so he is the opposite of that. He's in opposition to that because he is representing that which is not the indigenous. So it's very interesting when you consider those entities that are represented by Seth or Set, or that see Set as their representation. And additionally, we have Set or Seth as the god of chaos and the god of disorder. Consistent with that idea of the man of sin, we also have Set or Seth as the god of lawlessness. Set is also understood as the god of evil, anger, and wrath. Little Set or Seth is quite the busybody. Okay, so Set is also the deity of storms, earthquakes, and is also understood as the sky god of the air. And if those of you are familiar with scripture and theories about different entities in scripture, you know that there is a deity of the air. And so this fits in with Seth being identified with that deity of the air. And pulling most of that together, we have Seth being the god of destruction. Again, he is the destroyer. He's understood as a destroyer. And if you are familiar with the Set Osiris story, you know that just like Cain, mhm, Seth or Set destroyed his brother. And so you have these parallel narratives going on here with these entities. Okay, so ultimately we have Set or Seth as a god of war, of warfare. Set is understood as a man of war. So when you hear individuals talk about the deity in scripture that is the man of war, that is referring to an entity known as Set or Seth. Now, when you really look at scripture, what you find is a pantheon. You'll have individuals who claim that, that's not a pantheon. That's a pantheon going on in there. It's taking on deities from different cultures. So you have these Canaanite deities, you have Egyptian deities, you have just deities coming from everywhere that they are taking on and worshiping at different times. We were talking about the Hebrews, the people identified as Hebrews in the scripture. Abraham's descendants, in other words. And so they are all over the place with these various deities, depending on where they are and the time period. Okay. And so this integration of Seth or Set is not all that remarkable. What's also noteworthy is that the entity that wrote, according to the narrative, that wrote the scripture wherein Seth or Set is presented is Moses. Now, Moses didn't grow up, if you will, as a Hebrew. Moses grew up as royalty in an Egyptian household. And so when Moses was writing this, Moses would have had awareness of Set or Seth. And so it should not have been any surprise. That's why there's the question about why aren't these things being discussed? Because clearly Moses would have known who Set was when he authored Genesis. Okay, so he would have known who Eve or Havah or Kavah or Adam, he would have known who was being birthed in this narrative. And so he would have known that this third son, Seth, was Set and what the implications were for that baby's name. Okay, so continuing on. Now we get to the big problem. Set is also understood as the supplanter god, the god of supplanting. This is the trickster god. Sound familiar? And so this is a quote unquote divine trickster and a divine supplanter, also a shapeshifter. And so this thing takes on various identities. Along with that narrative we have about the original supplanter child in the book of Genesis. That would be Jacob. Okay. And so here we have Seth or Set being so similar to Cain, not only in the dynamic with the brother, but also these descendants, because the descendants, the names of the Cain line and the Seth line, they look so similar. It's very, very odd. And then we have one of Seth's descendants ultimately engaging in this supplanter dynamic by being a trickster, by being a shapeshifter, putting on all sorts of things to appear to be the brother. And so we have a lot of correlations going on here with respect to Seth or Set. And it would be really interesting if these entities were not aware of the identity of Set or Seth in these narratives here. And so when you see all of these dynamics associated with Set or Seth, you can see why this entity would be understood as an anti-Ma'at. Okay, if you look at some of the principles of Ma'at and who Ma'at was supposed to be representing, you can see that this entity, Set or Seth, is the antithesis of that. But this name Ma'at is also, in terms of transliterations, it's associated with Mary. And so Mary, Ma'at, there are these similarities with respect to these names, again, with that Ma dynamic going on there. And when you see these alternative names for Ma'at, you see how it is related to Mary. And so this Mayet, Majet, and Mayor, which also could be Major. And so there is this dynamic of rulership inside of the name, this dynamic of order is inside of this name. And so it's the antithesis of that disorder that is represented by Seth. And now we revisit this whole dynamic of Mary being a rebel. Not just Mary being a rebel, but that's what her name means. Okay, so her name means rebellion. And early on, the idea of rebellion is in relation to God in Scripture. The question is, what God are we talking about? Because remember, when you see the word God in Scripture, you then have to go and look at the translation and figure out what God are we talking about? What Lord are we talking about? Often, Baal is the Lord. Often, El is the Lord. Now we have El Shaddai is the Lord. Remember, Shaddai, Shadu, is essentially a transliteration of Seth or Set. And you have those T's and D's being interchanged, and you have all of these vowels being interchanged, and you have, the V's and the B's being interchanged. So always keep that in mind. But what we have here in terms of theory, in terms of symbolism, in terms of psychology, in terms of theology, is Mary representing the rebellion against the rulership of Set or Seth. Now let's quickly look at this construct of rebel and revel. And so essentially, what we have with respect to rebel, which of course relates to revel, and goes right back to that conversation we had about Prince and the revolution. And so, with respect to rebel, Mary's name essentially references this idea of a fresh declaration of war by the defeated. And so, somewhere in the narrative, somewhere in the symbolism, there is this idea of Mary representing that which was defeated and then responding to the defeat with the rebellion. It's really interesting sometimes when you see these depictions of Mary. Oftentimes you see these pictures of her where she's looking very meek and mild. Her eyes are downcast. And then you see these depictions of Mary wherein she is clearly Regina Caeli. Okay, so Regina meaning ruler, Rex meaning ruler. Okay, so the other thing about this idea of rebel is that this idea of Mary is associated with stubbornness, being obstinate and rebellious and insurgent. And you actually see that in her name. When you look at Strong's Concordance, you will see all of that, embedded in Mary. Not only do you see it with Mary, you also see even more of this interesting dynamic with Sarah. Interestingly, Sarah, the other meaning for Sarah is like princess. And so you've got princess and you've got queen, and then when you look at the other transliterations, you've got rebel. Okay, so you've got these two entities that are understood as in opposition to something. And so we're going to continue on here. Now, this understanding of Mary and rebel is pretty interesting because of what Mary brings forth. Yeah, she brings the noise, but what Mary brings forth is this rebellion against that which is deemed oppressive. And so that's what rebel is also about. It's about this idea of responding to oppression, this idea of salvation. Okay, and so what does Mary birth? Mary births salvation. And so, together with her son, that to which she gives birth, there is this representation of a refusal to be subordinate to what would be considered a controlling power. And again, this controlling power, when looking at the totality of this situation, the controlling power is Set or Seth. And here you also see that betacism dynamic going on here. So you've got rebel and revel. And revel is to rebel, to rise up in rebellion. And that, again, is what Mary's name means. So again, she brings the rebellion, she represents the rebellion. We're going to look at these depictions of Mary to get a better understanding of what is really being communicated here. What did Rome know about Mary? Now remember, Mary is not Cybele. Mary, this isn't a, Cybele Addis dynamic. There's something else going on here. And there's a communication about who Mary is supposed to be representing in these depictions. There are communications that are just not spoken to the general public. But when deconstructing these depictions of Mary, you see what is being communicated, and it's up to you to have a better understanding of what exactly is being depicted and what is being communicated. Now, this is a very important depiction because there is so much going on in this depiction. What is clear here is that Mary is the ruler. Okay, so this goes along with that Regina Caeli dynamic of being the queen of heaven or the king of heaven, the ruler of heaven. Mary is not only wearing the crown, Mary has the scepter. Okay, so she has the rod. Now, in some instances, you will see the little baby with the orb. Okay, so Mary will have the scepter, the baby has the orb. But ultimately, Mary is holding the staff of rulership. And so, what this is indicating is that the rulership is actually coming through her. The salvation is coming through her. The You remember that part about in the beginning was the word? Okay. All right. Well, the word was with her. The word was always inside of her, based upon this particular type of depiction. And so, what's being communicated here is that she is the one who is bringing the rightful heir. What's also interesting about this is in the narrative, the entity understood as Jesus is the first time that you really hear about a firstborn who is assuming rulership. In all of those narratives in the Old Testament, you have these repeated narratives of the original being supplanted by a later born child, the inheritance being given to the later born child, the second child, the third child. And so you have all of these narratives. And so with her, however, you have a ruler in Mary, and she brings forth a firstborn. And there are many understandings of the entity known as Jesus being the firstborn. Now, some will point to that dynamic in the book of Revelation, but you already know the questions about the book of Revelation. We're talking about these narratives here with respect to these depictions. And so Mary is representing that which is bringing forth the rightful heir. It's very similar to Mary, Queen of Scots, and what was happening with King James when King James was able to represent all of these kingdoms simultaneously. He was the heir to all of this. And so that's what this is looking like with respect to Mary. She's saying basically, or Rome is telling you, this one is the rightful heir, not Seth, not Set. Mary also departs from a number of narratives based upon what is identified as a matrilineal patriarchy. The standard line of descent in scripture is patrilineal and patriarchal. However, Mary diverges from this particular convention with a contravention. And with this contravention, she is the entity through which the rulership comes. And so it's a matrilineal inheritance with a patriarchal rule. You see this with indigenous cultures, wherein the son of the ruling mother becomes the ruler. And then when he finishes ruling based upon matrilineal descent, it doesn't descend to his son, it goes back up to his sister and down to his sister's son. And so that matrilineal line continues, but the rulership, in some of these instances, the rulership happens to be a patriarchal rulership, but it's rulership that comes through the mother. And so in this narrative about Mary, Joseph is not the one through whom the rulership comes. I know a number of people try to assert that the narrative in scripture is incorrect. They can't actually provide anything to support that this narrative is incorrect. And instead, they try to circumvent this matrilineal dynamic by insisting that Mary did know, in quotation marks, Joseph prior to giving birth. But the narrative in scripture is very clear. She had not known a man. And that's what all of the dynamics are all about, is this dynamic of this matrilineal descent. Again, that is in contravention of what typically was going on in scripture. And Mary and Set or Seth also represent numbers. Okay, so the number that is associated with Set or Seth is the number 6. Of course it is. What else would it be? And so the number 6 is associated with Seth, with Set, with Sin, with Shen, and then we have another number that is related to Mary or Ma'at. And the number associated with Mary is the number 7, which of course is supposed to be the number of completion. This is also a number of perfection. And so this is a divine, it's supposed to be a divine number, a positive divine number associated with order and rest, whereas Set is disorder and chaos and anything but rest. And a major part of Mary's rebellion, this symbolic rebellion, is what she brings forth in terms of the entity known as Jesus. We're going to address that name in just a second also. And so what Mary is bringing forth, that is again, the antithesis of Set or Seth, which represents disorder and chaos, is Mary brings forth what has been identified as the Prince of Peace. And another thing, on a final note, with respect to this name Jesus, we found something very interesting, if you recall, in that papal bull, where these letters were inserted. And if you take out these inserted letters, all you have is Jehu. So you don't have that S, which is a part of Seth or Set. So that's actually missing from the actual name that Rome had for Jesus. And so all you have is Jehu. And that's very interesting because Jehu actually indicates he who is God.